It was supposed to be a routine school trip to the mountains. Laughter echoed through the forest trails as students explored the wilderness. But when the group returned to the bus, one student was missing. No trace, no clues, just a single shoe left behind on the edge of a cliff. For decades, the case remained unsolved until a dusty photograph tucked inside an old book at a second-hand bookstore reignited the mystery. The face in the photo was unmistakable. But how could it be possible? The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The students of Ridgewood High chattered excitedly as they stepped off the bus, their voices blending with the rustling of leaves in the dense forest. It was the annual school trip to Black Hollow National Park, a sprawling wilderness known for its towering trees, hidden caves, and breathtaking views. Among the group was 16-year-old Emily Carter, a quiet girl with a love for photography. She clutched her vintage camera tightly, her eyes scanning the landscape for the perfect shot. Emily wasn't like the others. She preferred the company of nature to the noisy chatter of her classmates. "Stay with the group, Emily," her teacher, Mr. Hargrove, called out as the students began their hike up the trail. "I will," she replied, though her mind was already wandering to the possibilities of what she might capture with her lens. The trail wound through the forest, sunlight filtering through the canopy above. The group paused occasionally to admire the scenery, snapping photos and laughing as they explored. Emily lingered at the back, her camera clicking as she captured the play of light and shadow on the moss-covered rocks. As the day wore on, the group reached a clearing with a stunning view of the valley below. The students spread out, some sitting on the grass, others venturing closer to the edge of the cliff to peer down at the river winding far below. Emily stood apart, her camera focused on a hawk circling in the distance. She didn't notice the others beginning to gather their things, preparing to head back down the trail. "Emily, let's go!" one of her classmates called, but she didn't respond. By the time the group returned to the bus, the sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. It wasn't until Mr. Hargrove did a head count that anyone realized Emily was missing. "Did anyone see her on the way back?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. The students exchanged uneasy glances, shaking their heads. "She was taking pictures near the cliff," one of them offered hesitantly. Panic set in as the teachers and chaperones retraced their steps, calling Emily's name into the growing darkness. Flashlights cut through the shadows as they searched the trail, but there was no sign of her. Near the edge of the cliff, they found her camera, its strap tangled in the underbrush. A single shoe lay nearby, its laces undone. The search continued through the night and into the following days, but Emily was never found. The official report concluded that she had likely fallen into the river below, her body swept away by the current. But not everyone was convinced. Whispers of something more sinister began to circulate. Rumors of strange lights seen in the forest. That night, of a shadowy figure spotted near the cliff's edge, and then there was the photograph. The last image on Emily's camera was blurry, but it showed something, or someone, standing in the trees, watching. The years passed, and Emily Carter's disappearance became a ghost story whispered among the students of Ridgewood High. Every new class heard the tale of the girl who vanished on the school trip, her camera left behind as the only clue. Some claimed her spirit haunted Black Hollow National Park, while others dismissed it as a tragic accident. For Emily's parents, however, the pain never faded. They refused to believe their daughter was gone forever. Her mother, Margaret, spent countless nights poring over maps of the park, marking every spot where search teams had looked. Her father, Robert, kept Emily's room exactly as she had left, her favorite books and posters untouched. But as the years turned into decades, hope dimmed. The world moved on, and Emily became a memory, a name etched into the town's history, but little more. It wasn't until 30 years later in a small, dimly lit bookstore on the other side of the country that the mystery of Emily Carter resurfaced. The bookstore was tucked away on a quiet street in Portland, Oregon. Its shelves were crammed with second-hand books, their spines faded and titles barely legible. Among the aisles wandered a man in his late 40s, his salt and pepper hair falling into his eyes as he thumbed through a stack of old photography books. His name was Daniel Price, a freelance journalist with a knack for uncovering forgotten stories. Daniel wasn't looking for anything in particular that day. He often visited bookstores like this one, hoping to stumble upon inspiration for his next article. But as he flipped through the pages of a worn book titled Lost Landscapes, Forgotten Places of the Pacific Northwest, something fell out and fluttered to the floor. It was a photograph. Daniel bent down to pick it up, his brow furrowing as he examined the image. It was old, the edges yellowed and the colors slightly faded. The photo showed a young girl standing in a forest, her face partially obscured by shadows. She was holding a camera, her expression unreadable. But it wasn't the girl's face that caught Daniel's attention. It was the background. Behind her, barely visible among the trees, was a figure. It was blurry, almost translucent, but unmistakably human. Daniel turned the photo over, hoping for a clue. Written in faint pencil on the back were the words, Black Hollow, 1993. His heart skipped a beat. He knew that name, Black Hollow National Park, the place where Emily Carter had disappeared. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled onto something important. He spent the next few days researching Emily's case, digging through old newspaper archives and online forums. The details were sparse, but the story was as chilling as he remembered. The photograph haunted him. How had it ended up in a bookstore in Portland? Who had taken it and why? And most importantly, who or what was the figure in the background? Determined to find answers, Daniel decided to visit Black Hollow National Park. He packed his camera, a notebook, and a flashlight, preparing for what he hoped would be a straightforward investigation. But as he drove through the winding mountain roads toward the park, a sense of unease settled over him. The park hadn't changed much in 30 years. The same towering trees lined the trails, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. The air was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of moss and pine. Daniel followed the trail described in the old reports, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. He stopped occasionally to take photos, his eyes scanning the forest for anything unusual. When he reached the clearing where Emily had last been seen, he felt a chill run down his spine. The view was as breathtaking as the reports had described, the valley stretching out below like a painting. But the place felt heavy, as if the forest itself remembered what had happened here. Daniel pulled out the photograph and held it up, comparing it to the scene before him. The trees matched, their gnarled trunks and twisted branches forming the same patterns as in the photo. He walked slowly, his eyes darting between the picture and the forest, searching for the exact spot where it had been taken. And then he saw it. A tree, its bark scarred with deep grooves, stood out among the others. It was the same tree from the photograph. Daniel's pulse quickened as he approached, his camera ready. As he examined the area, he noticed something strange. The ground near the tree was disturbed, the soil loose and uneven. Kneeling down, he brushed away the dirt, revealing a small, rusted tin box buried beneath the surface. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a stack of photographs, each one more unsettling than the last. They showed the same girl, Emily, standing in various parts of the forest. In some, she was smiling, her camera slung over her shoulder. In others, she looked frightened, her eyes wide as she stared at something just out of frame. But it was the final photograph that made Daniel's blood run cold. It showed Emily standing in the clearing, her back to the camera. Behind her, the figure from the first photograph was closer now, its features still indistinct but undeniably human. And scrawled across the bottom of the photo, in the same faint pencil as before, were the words, "She's still here." Daniel's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he had found. Who had taken these photos? How had they ended up buried in the forest? And what did the message mean? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Daniel felt a growing sense of dread. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees whispering secrets he couldn't understand. He knew he should leave, but something kept him rooted to the spot. A faint sound reached his ears, a soft melodic hum like a lullaby carried on the wind. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A figure, barely visible among the trees, watching him. It was the same figure from the photographs, and it was getting closer. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. The figure stood motionless among the trees, its outline barely distinguishable from the shadows. It was too far away to make out any details, but its presence was undeniable. The hum that had drifted through the air grew louder, more distinct, like a low, mournful song. He fumbled for his camera, his hands shaking as he raised it to his eye. Through the lens, the figure came into sharper focus. It was tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long, its face obscured by the darkness. But there was something about its posture, something almost human. Daniel snapped a photo, the click of the shutter echoing through the clearing. The figure didn't move. "Who are you?" he called out, his voice trembling. No response. The hum stopped abruptly, leaving the forest eerily silent. The figure tilted its head as if studying him, and then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the trees. Daniel hesitated for a moment, his instincts screaming at him to leave, but the journalist in him refused to let go of the mystery. He slung his camera over his shoulder and followed, his flashlight cutting through the growing darkness. The forest seemed different now, the trees closer together, their branches intertwining, to form a canopy that blocked out the last traces of daylight. The air was colder, heavier, and the silence was oppressive. Daniel's footsteps sounded unnaturally loud, each crunch of leaves and twigs echoing like a gunshot. He followed the faint trail left by the figure, his flashlight catching glimpses of disturbed earth and broken branches. The path led deeper, into the woods, away from the main trail, and into an area that felt untouched by time. As he walked, he noticed strange markings on the trees, symbols carved into the bark, their meanings unknown. Some looked like spirals, others like crude stick figures. They seemed to grow more frequent the farther he went, as if guiding him toward something, and then he saw it. A cabin hidden among the trees, its wooden walls weathered and covered in moss. The windows were dark, the door slightly ajar. It looked abandoned, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He approached cautiously, his flashlight sweeping over the exterior. The symbols from the trees were carved into the cabin's walls, their patterns more intricate and deliberate. The hum returned, faint but persistent, emanating from somewhere inside. Daniel pushed the door open, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. The interior was dark, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. His flashlight revealed a single room, sparsely furnished with a table, a chair, and a bed. On the table lay a stack of papers, yellowed with age. Daniel stepped closer, his heart pounding as he realized they were photographs. They were of Emily. In each photo, she looked older than the last, her face marked by fear and exhaustion. The final image showed her standing in the same clearing, where Daniel had found the tin box, her eyes wide with terror. Behind her, the figure loomed, its hand outstretched as if reaching for her. Beneath the photos was a notebook, its cover cracked and worn. Daniel opened it, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. The handwriting was messy, The words scrawled in a frantic, almost desperate manner. She's still here. She never left. The forest won't let her go. The entries grew more incoherent, filled with ramblings about the figure in the woods, the hum and the symbols carved into the trees. One passage stood out. The Watcher is not human. It's something older, something tied to this place. It takes what it wants and keeps them here, trapped between worlds. Emily is one of them. Now I tried to save her, but it's too late. If you're reading this, leave. Don't let it take you too. Daniel's blood ran cold. He closed the notebook and stepped back, his mind racing. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the cabin, and then he heard it, a soft, shuffling sound outside. Daniel turned off his flashlight, plunging the cabin into darkness. He crouched by the window, peering out into the night. The figure was there, standing just beyond the tree line, its head tilted as if listening. It began to move, its steps slow and deliberate, heading straight for the cabin. Daniel's heart pounded as he searched for a way out. The only door led directly toward the figure, and the windows were too small to climb through. He was trapped. The hum grew deafening, filling his ears and making it hard to think. The figure reached the cabin, its shadow stretching across the floor as it stood in the doorway. "Emily," it whispered, its voice low and distorted. Daniel froze. The figure stepped inside, its movements unnaturally fluid. It was closer now, and for the first time, Daniel could see its face, or what should have been a face. There were no eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, featureless surface. "Emily," it said again, the word echoing in Daniel's mind. He stumbled backward, his hand brushing against the stack of photographs on the table. Desperation took over, and he grabbed the photos, holding them up like a shield. The figure stopped, its head tilting as if recognizing the images. The hum faltered, replaced by a low, guttural sound that might have been a growl. Daniel didn't wait to see what would happen next. He bolted for the door, shoving past the figure and sprinting into the woods. The forest seemed alive, the trees shifting and twisting as Daniel ran. The hum returned, louder than ever, chasing him through the darkness. He didn't look back, his only focus on escaping the nightmare. When he finally burst onto the main trail, the hum stopped. The forest was silent again, the air still. Daniel collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. In his hand, he still clutched the photographs. He didn't know how long he sat there, staring at the images of Emily. But one thing was clear. The mystery of her disappearance was far from over, and whatever was in the woods wasn't done with him yet. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his motel room, the photographs spread out on the small table in front of him. The hum still echoed faintly in his ears, a phantom sound that refused to leave him. His hands trembled as he flipped through the images again, his mind racing to piece together the fragments of the mystery. Emily Carter, the Watcher, the symbols, the notebook's warning. The forest wasn't just a place, it was something alive, something ancient, and it had taken Emily. But why? Daniel's instincts as a journalist told him there was more to uncover, that the answers lay somewhere in Black Hollow National Park. But his gut told him to run, to leave, and never look back. He couldn't. The next morning, Daniel returned to the park, armed with a map, a compass, and a determination that bordered on recklessness. He had marked the location of the cabin on his map, but he wasn't going back there. Instead, he focused on the symbols he had seen carved into the trees. If the forest was a puzzle, the symbols were the pieces. The first few hours of his search were uneventful. The forest was quiet, the only sounds the crunch of leaves beneath, his boots and the occasional rustle of wildlife. But as he ventured deeper, the air grew heavier, the light dimmer. The trees seemed to close in around him, their twisted branches forming shapes that looked almost human. Daniel began to notice the symbols again, carved into the bark of certain trees. They were more frequent now, their patterns more complex. He sketched them in his notebook, hoping to decipher their meaning later. One symbol in particular caught his attention. It was larger than the others, carved into the trunk of an ancient oak. It resembled an eye, its pupil a spiral that seemed to draw him in. As he traced the symbol with his fingers, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over him. The forest blurred, the trees swaying as if caught in a storm. Daniel stumbled back, clutching his head, as a sharp, piercing sound filled his ears. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. When he opened his eyes, the forest was different. The trees were taller, their trunks impossibly wide. The air was thick with mist, and the ground beneath his feet felt soft, almost spongy. The light was strange, a pale silvery glow that seemed to come from nowhere. Daniel realized he wasn't in the same forest anymore. He turned in a slow circle, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of what had happened. The symbols were still there, carved into the trees, but they seemed to pulse faintly as if alive. A sound broke the silence, a soft, melodic hum. Daniel's blood ran cold. He turned toward the source of the sound, his flashlight cutting through the mist, and then he saw her. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the clearing, her back to him. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing the day she disappeared, but they were tattered and stained. Her hair was longer, tangled with leaves and twigs, and her skin was pale, almost translucent. "Emily?" Daniel called out, his voice shaking. She didn't respond. He took a cautious step forward, his flashlight trained on her. "Emily, it's okay. I'm here to help you." Slowly, she turned to face him. Her eyes were hollow, her expression blank, but there was something in her gaze, something that wasn't entirely human. "Leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel froze. "What?" "Leave," she repeated, her voice stronger this time. "You shouldn't be here." "I'm trying to help you," Daniel said, taking another step forward. "I found the photographs. I know what happened to you." Emily shook her head, her movements jerky, unnatural. "You don't understand. It won't let you leave." "What won't let me leave?" "The Watcher," she said, her voice trembling. "It's part of the forest. It's always been here. It takes what it wants, and it doesn't let go." Daniel's mind raced. "But you're still here. That means there's a way to stop it, right? A way to free you?" Emily's gaze shifted to something behind him, her eyes widening in fear. "It's too late," she whispered. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the air. Daniel turned, his flashlight sweeping over the trees. The mist thickened, swirling around him like a living thing, and then he saw it. The Watcher emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and flickering like a mirage. It was taller than he remembered, its limbs impossibly long, its face still featureless. The symbols on the trees glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the hum. Daniel backed away, his heart pounding. "What do you want?" he shouted. The Watcher didn't respond. It moved closer, its steps slow and deliberate. Emily's voice cut through the hum. "Run!" Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He turned and bolted, the mist clawing at him as he ran. The forest seemed to shift around him, the trees closing in, the ground uneven and treacherous. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, as if the forest itself was alive and angry. Daniel didn't know how long he ran. Time seemed to lose meaning in the endless maze of trees and mist. His legs burned, his lungs ached, but he didn't stop. Finally, he burst into a clearing, the mist thinning as he stumbled to a halt. The symbols were everywhere, carved into the ground, the trees, even the rocks. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone altar, its surface covered in the same spiraling patterns. Daniel approached cautiously, his flashlight flickering. The hum was quieter here, almost a whisper, but it felt more dangerous, more focused. On the altar lay a single photograph. It was of him. Daniel stared at the photo, his mind reeling. How was this possible? Who had taken it? The hum grew louder. Again, the air vibrating with an almost tangible energy. The watcher stepped into the clearing, its form more solid now, more real. Daniel backed away, his eyes darting between the altar and the creature. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. The watcher didn't answer. It raised one long, spindly arm pointing at the altar. Daniel's gaze fell to the photograph again, and then he understood. The forest didn't just take people. It consumed them, made them part of itself. And now it wanted him. The hum reached a crescendo as the watcher advanced. Daniel's mind raced, searching for a way out. He grabbed the photograph, clutching it tightly as he turned and ran. The forest roared around him, the trees twisting and writhing as if alive. The symbols glowed brighter, their light blinding, but Daniel didn't stop, he didn't look back, and as he broke through the tree line, the hum stopped. The forest was silent. Daniel collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The photographs were still in his hand, their edges crumpled. He didn't know how he had escaped, but one thing was certain. The forest wasn't done with him, and neither was the watcher. Nodded, her curiosity fading as she walked away to tend to another customer. Daniel sipped his coffee, his mind racing. He needed answers, but he didn't know where to start. The forest was alive, that much was clear. But what was the watcher? And why had it taken Emily? He pulled out the notebook he had taken from the cabin and flipped through the pages again. The handwriting was frantic, the words disjointed, but one passage caught his eye. The symbols are the key. They bind the watcher to the forest, but they also keep it contained. If the symbols are broken, it will be free. Daniel's stomach turned. The symbols weren't just random carvings. They were a barrier, a way to keep the watcher from escaping. The forest. But if that was true, why had the watcher let him go? Unless a chilling thought crept into his mind. What if the watcher hadn't let him go? What if it had marked him just like it had marked Emily? Daniel spent the next few days researching everything he could about Black Hollow National Park. He scoured old newspaper articles, online forums, and even local legends, piecing together a fragmented history of the area. The park had always been shrouded in mystery. Long before it became a protected wilderness, it was home to the Black Hollow tribe, a small, isolated group of people who believed the forest was sacred. They spoke of a spirit that lived among the trees, a guardian that watched over the land. But the stories took a darker turn. According to legend, the spirit wasn't benevolent. It was a predator, feeding on those who wandered too far into its domain. The tribe had carved symbols into the trees to keep the spirit contained, creating a boundary that it couldn't cross. When settlers arrived in the area, they dismissed the stories as superstition. They cut down trees, built roads, and ignored the warnings of the tribe. And then the disappearances began. Over the years, dozens of people vanished in Black Hollow National Park. Hikers, campers, even park rangers, none of them were ever found. The authorities blamed accidents, wild animals, and the treacherous terrain, but the locals knew better. The forest was hungry. Daniel's research led him to a man named Henry Lawson, a retired park ranger who had worked at Black Hollow for over 30 years. Henry was in his 70s now, living in a small cabin on the outskirts of town. When Daniel knocked on his door, Henry answered with a wary expression. "If you're here about the forest, you're wasting your time," he said gruffly. "I'm not here to waste your time," Daniel replied. "I just want to know the truth." Henry studied him for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. The cabin was cluttered but cozy, filled with old books, maps, and photographs. Henry poured them both a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. "You're not the first to come looking for answers," he said. "But most people don't like what they find." "I've already been in the forest," Daniel said. "I've seen the Watcher." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Then you're lucky to be alive." Daniel pulled out the photographs and the notebook, laying them on the table. "I found these in the forest. I think they belong to someone who tried to stop it." Henry picked up the notebook, his hands trembling slightly as he flipped through the pages. This belonged to a man named Thomas Grayson. He was a ranger here back in the 90s. He disappeared in the forest just like the others. What happened to him? Daniel asked. Henry shook his head. No one knows, but if he was trying to stop the Watcher, he failed. Daniel leaned forward. There has to be a way to stop it. The symbols, what do they mean? Henry hesitated, then sighed. The symbols are ancient. The Black Hollow tribe carved them to keep the spirit contained. But over the years, people have destroyed them, cut down trees, carved over the markings. Every time a symbol is broken, the Watcher gets stronger. Daniel's heart sank, so it's only a matter of time before it escapes. Henry nodded grimly. Unless someone restores the symbols. The idea was insane. Daniel knew that. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to do this, that the forest had let him go for a reason. Over the next few days, he prepared for his return to Black Hollow. He studied the symbols, memorizing their patterns and meanings. He gathered supplies, paint, carving tools, and a map marked with the locations of the remaining symbols, and then, with a mixture of fear and determination, he went back into the forest. The forest was different this time. The air was heavier, the light dimmer, and the hum was constant, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet. Daniel worked quickly, restoring the symbols one by one. He painted over faded carvings, etched new ones into the bark of trees, and whispered prayers he didn't fully understand. But the forest fought back. The Watcher appeared more frequently now, its form flickering in and out of the shadows. The hum grew louder, disorienting him, making it harder to focus. At one point, he stumbled across a clearing and saw Emily again. She was standing in the center, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "You can't save me," she said. "I have to try," Daniel replied. By the time he reached the final symbol, Daniel was exhausted. His hands were blistered, his body bruised, but he didn't stop. He carved the last symbol into the bark of an ancient tree, his movements slow and deliberate. The hum reached a deafening pitch, and the forest seemed to tremble around him. The Watcher appeared, its form towering over him, its featureless face, inches from his own. For a moment, Daniel thought it was over, but then the symbols began to glow, their light spreading through the forest like wildfire. The hum faltered, then stopped altogether. The Watcher let out a low, guttural sound, its form flickering and fading until it disappeared completely, and then silence. Daniel stumbled out of the forest at dawn, the photograph still clutched in his hand. He didn't know if the Watcher was truly gone, but the forest felt different, lighter, quieter. As he drove away, he glanced at the photographs one last time. Emily's face stared back at him, her expression calm, almost peaceful, and, for the first time in decades, the forest was still.